Hello and welcome to my class. This is Mr. Spoonhauer and my debut episode for 7th grade, A Spoonful of History. Today we are going to talk about Rome's legacy. This is part 1 of 2 in a series. The first part 1, is basically Rome's prosperous empire, some of their successes and legacies, and the second part, which will be coming in our next helping of A Spoonful of History, will be Rome's fall. So today I'd like to get started with our first page of our notes, which is a prosperous empire. So if you look at your notes right now, you will see that up in the very top right hand corner we have bulleted, or I should say underline and bold, a prosperous empire. So I'd like to begin with our first emperor, which is Augustus. Now remember, Augustus is actually Julius Caesar's nephew, and his real name is Octavian, but when he becomes Rome's first emperor, he will take the name Augustus Caesar, and it is here that he will usher in a period of time of peace and unity in the empire. Now, I don't want you to think that Augustus was this great guy. He did not care anything about human rights, people's self-dignity. He wanted people to worship him almost like a god. But where his true talent lie is that he did reform Rome and created a time of about 200 years of complete peace and unity within the Roman Empire. Part of how he did this is that he created a professional army of all Roman citizens. Their job was to basically protect the Roman citizens from within and outside of the vast Roman Empire. And from there, he also created a Praetorian Guard of about 9,000 men to protect the emperor. Now, these Praetorian Guards of these 9,000 men will eventually gain a lot of power and prestige and influence within the emperor, and eventually become very important in Roman politics as we go along in our story towards the end of the fall of the Roman Empire. He also at this time increased his sponsorship of the arts. The Romans greatly admired Greeks in their Greek art, and he had lots of buildings constructed, statues, and he also encouraged writers like Virgil, who wrote the Aeneid, and other writers that wrote satires, which made fun of people and their hardships and their as well as odes, which are poems. He also used grain that he took from North Africa to feed the poor, to kind of keep them happy so that they wouldn't rebel. And he improved the government. Because the empire was so large, he broke up the empire into different quadrants and had precepts or governors that ruled the empire, collected taxes, and inevitably had to answer to him. And it is said that he was quoted as saying that, "I found Rome a city of bricks and left it a city of marble." Now, after Augustus dies, he did not leave anybody to take the reign after him. He did train one of his nephew's relatives, his name is Tiberius, as someone who would take control. So after Augustus dies, Tiberius becomes the emperor. Now, Tiberius actually is pretty successful. He is a decent emperor and doesn't do anything bad. However, after him, you have Caligula. Now, Caligula he's kind of a nut job. His nickname, that's not his real name. Caligula is his nickname, but he liked to be called that. And really, Caligula is Latin for a sandal that a Roman warrior would wear. He would go with his family to witness battles and see violent upheavals squelched, as well as people being killed and murdered and tortured. So he had a few screws loose, and was not of great sound in mind. After Caligula comes Claudius. Now, Claudius is a decent ruler, but after him, when he dies, is Nero. And Nero is probably the craziest of them all. He brought back the Roman Olympics, or brought back the Greek Olympics to Rome. He won gold in every single event, mainly because nobody else would compete against him or he'd have them killed. He also was said that he sat there and did nothing when Rome burned to the ground. He crucified Christians for sport and was just an absolute horrible person. Some religious historians believe that Nero was the Antichrist, and when you look at numerology, the 666 roughly kind of translates, from what I understand, is into Nero. After Nero's death or assassination comes one of his generals, Vespasian, and Vespasian will actually take the reign and rule after this, and will restore order to Rome, which after Nero and the other Julio Claudian emperors, there was complete disorder. Vespasian will actually reunify Rome. He will put down rebellions and restore peace. And one of the rebellions that he will put down is in Jerusalem, in which his soldiers will basically destroy the Jewish temple. After this, basically, after Vespasian, you have a series of what they call good emperors. Now, these good emperors are people that are not related to Augustus or Vespasian, and they are a series of really good emperors. This is where you have basically a century of prosperity. You have the standard of living will rise, and a new golden age of Rome will be created. Agriculture will flourish. More and more people will be able to be fed. They'll be happy, and Rome will be more industrious and prosperous. They will, under Trajan, one of the good emperors, Rome will reach, or the Roman Empire will reach its largest in size. It will go all the way up to the Rhine in the north, the Danube in the east, all the way up into England, and it is after him that Hadrian, one of the last good emperors, will build a wall across England, like the picture you see in the upper right hand corner here, and it's called Hadrian's Wall, to keep the Picts and the Scots out, who were very violent, warlike people that were not very happy with the Roman occupation of England. The focus of Hadrian and some of the other later emperors was to not grow the empire, but to focus on protecting the empire. And it is here that they focused on, and people began to see themselves and identify themselves as Roman. They may have spoke different languages, from Greek to Latin to English or Gaelic, but for the most part, they were unified and saw themselves as Romans because they were unified under a codified system of laws called the Roman law. Roman culture. Now, Roman culture, they idolized, and they, as much as they could, they copied the Greeks from their style of columns and porches and vaults. They also copied their gods. They may have named them slightly different, but they idolized the Greeks. They used the same type of art, such as statues. However, where the Greek style of statue was more of the perfected human being, Roman statues were more realistic, that if you had a wart or a scar or some defect, that was immortalized in stone. So your statue was more realistic, as opposed to everything was perfect in the Greek type of statue. They also built and perfected the use of arches for bridges, so that they could build aqueducts that would carry water from all parts of Europe into Rome and other major epicenters of the Roman Republic. They built domes, such as the which you see down at the bottom, which was actually built during the Renaissance, of the Duomo Cathedral there in Florence. But they built domes, and they were also very influential in the use of creating concrete, which made buildings very strong and almost like rock and almost indestructible, allowing them to build roads to unify and unite the entire Roman Empire, which was very important, not just to be able to dispatch soldiers to put down any kind of rebellion, but also connecting the whole entire Roman Empire, whether you're in France or Gaul, modern Germany, the eastern part of Romania or Hungary. You were united by roads for trade, and which helped unify a culture that Rome wanted to create. Some of the more important and famous buildings that were done during this period of time was the Colosseum and the Pantheon. Next, we will go to other parts of Rome, which is literature. Much of the literature that the Romans had were based on the idea of Greek writings, the genre of the comedy, the tragedy. You have writers like Livy, who was the historian of Rome. He actually wrote the first history of Rome, and he was actually very, very favorable of the early Roman emperors, and he was kind of had rose-colored glasses on and saw that the early Roman emperors were great. However, Tacitus believed Rome was losing its values, that the emperors were fat and lazy and basically were taking the power and freedom away from its average citizens, and really did not paint Rome as being a very good empire, a very good model for the world. He believed that people were not industrious, that they were wasting their time on sports and pleasure instead of working, going to the Colosseum and watching gladiators maim themselves. And at this time, because of the wide reaches of Europe, the common language of Europe was Latin. Even though there was vernacular in other areas of Europe that spoke a different language, the official language of the Roman Empire and most of the world, really of the Roman world in Europe at that time, all the way up until really the Renaissance, what the common language of academics and of religion and other things were Latin. Galen is another important person in the Roman Empire. Galen is a scientist, and what he did is he cut up dead animal bodies and dissected them, and did important books on anatomy showing how the muscles work, the vascular system, organs, and these books were actually used for a very long time for physicians all the way up until really the Renaissance and Da Vinci and things like that, who cut open real people. And then you also have Ptolemy, who mapped the stars in the universe, and even though he came up with the wrong idea that the Earth was the center of the universe and everything revolved around it, he was so influential that that was the law of the universe. That was the what everybody believed all the way up, really until Galileo. And Galileo faced house arrest. We'll talk about that more as we get into the Renaissance. He faced house arrest because of his belief that everything revolved around the sun and not the earth. And lastly, roads. Roads were an incredibly important part of the Roman Empire's success, because it not only allowed them to be able to send out their Roman guard to put down any kind of rebellions, but it connected every inch of the Roman Empire for trade, for commerce, allowing people to exchange culture, exchange foods, exchange traditions, and to kind of unify and create one really single empire. Even though it was a very large empire, with many different countries and nationalities and cultures. However, they were united together under one government and one common idea. And that main part, and that why it was so successful, was because of the roads. Religion and philosophy, which is our last section of this note guides. Remember, Rome, like the Greeks, were polytheistic, meaning that they believed in many gods. Their gods were different. They were the same, really, as the Greeks, but they were named different. For example, Zeus, which is the Greek god, is named Jupiter in the Roman world. They believed that spirits lived in everything, and that you had to pray and make offerings. Many wealthy people of Rome had statues and mausoleums and temples in their homes in which they made offerings and prayed to the different gods for favor. It's important to understand that at this time Rome did allow other religions such as Christianity, Judaism, and other things. However, if you threatened the profits or power of the Roman Empire, you would be killed. And another really important philosophy that came about is this idea of Stoicism, which is slightly different from the Greek idea of Stoicism. This stressed the idea of civic duty and reason, showing very little emotion, and putting your nation and others ahead of yourself, which is completely ironic because one of the biggest students of Stoicism was Nero, and when you look at Nero's life, he was anything but stoic. So this is the end of my part 1 lecture of the legacy of Rome. I hope you enjoyed it, and keep tuned for part 2, which we will be having probably next week posted online, and that will be the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. Thank you very much.